Today is January 19th, 2021. I'm Mark Heinlein, Training Director for the National Tile Contractors Association. You are watching and attending the NTCA's Roundtable Live Artisan Edition, session number 4 in our series, and today's session is on templating. Our presenter today, our lead presenter, is the very reputable Mr. Joshua Nordstrom. Also on our panel, we have the very reputable Mr. Lee Callawart and the equally reputable Mrs. Angie Ray. Thank you all for being our panelists, and I'm going to turn it over now to Joshua Nordstrom with one last instruction. Joshua will be presenting a series of videos today. These are terrific videos. He'll have some information. We'll take a pause after each video to take any questions you might have. And here's how you ask your question. Just raise your hand. Our panel will watch for your hand raised and we'll bring you into the conversation and connect you with Joshua. So without further ado, Joshua Nordstrom.
Hey everybody, this is our first templating roundtable. I think we have planned to do more of them, but we chose to go with mine first, and here I am. Normally when I template, I draw everything life size. It's off of a scale drawing, and we'll probably talk more about all that when we do our designing roundtable. But normally everything is done with a scale drawing, so it's scaled to size so it can be blown up to size, and then I template that way. But with what I'm going to be sharing with you guys tonight is a project that we just completed, and it was a fireplace surround, and it was of Ketchimak Bay, and Ketchimak Bay is the bay that I live on up here in Homer, Alaska. So this is a reflection scene of Ketchimak Bay, and I'm going to explain how I templated this. And this one I actually just drew life size. I had a template that I made on like construction paper, and I measured it out to the size that it needed to be that the clients and I had talked about. And then I drew the top portion of it, which is the mountains. And then I'm going to explain how I got the mirrored image for the reflection throughout the video process here. And then when it's all said and done, we're going to show just a little GoPro video that I put together of the installation, just kind of a fun little thing to see. But this was made all with, it's all porcelain, this one is, and the border is slate. So we've got a light blue porcelain up top with 4 different colors in the mountains and the snow. And then the reflection down below with the water is a darker blue tile. So with all that being said, I guess we could probably, well, let's start out. Is there any questions to begin with? I guess let's start there. I can't see everybody, but if anybody has any questions, we'll answer them. Otherwise, we'll just roll with our first video. And I guess I can just try to do some explaining afterwards. I had some notes for this. I apologize. My notes, long story, but I don't have them. They got lost this weekend. Yeah. So I'm just kind of winging this, and which I think I'll be able to do a pretty good job. Luckily, with the videos are here, and nobody has a question. We'll just play the first one, Mark. Talking about templating on this roundtable, and this is my way to do it. So normally what I do is I draw everything on graph paper to scale, and then I use overhead projector paper, and I will blow that up on my projector to the life size, what it needs to be for the job. But in this case, I just drew it, and I didn't have that option to blow it up. So this is a mirrored reflection of Ketchimak Bay. So we've got a water line right here with the mountains and sky above it. And then this is the reflection, and it's just a mirrored reflection opposite of what's on top down below with a little darker blue tile for the water. It's going to be framed with slate. We've got a gray field tile, And then we've got the slate that's going to be the floor, and this, or on a fireplace, and this right here is going to be the corner. So this is going to be folded right here. So on that, I was just starting to explain the process, which is what I talked about here originally. I drew the top section, and then I went over it with tracing paper. I mentioned that I use tracing paper when I blow things up. In this case, I did the tracing paper again. I didn't have like any carbon paper. I could probably find that. You could probably use something like that. But what I found that works well is, since this is a mirrored image and I'm trying to get the exact, there's two ways you can go. You can make your pattern, and you can use that original pattern and just flip it upside down and trace that so you got your mirrored image. But in order to draw it out and put it on the template so the client can see it life size and colored, to kind of give them an idea what they're paying for, that's the process I'm explaining to you now. So what I did is I'll take the tracing paper and I'll put the tracing paper over the image and I'll trace it, but I'll trace it with a pastel. And then you can take that, once you've traced it out, and you can flip that tracing paper over so it's upside down and you got your reverse image. And then you can go over that again, over your pastel line with a pencil line, and then it transfers that pastel to your template. And that would be the same thing that like a carbon paper would do. But that's what you do if you don't have carbon paper. So the next video is going to explain that process a little bit, and how I was able to mirror that. And I find that it's really good, like when I'm doing projects for clients, I go into them and I can see the vision clearly in my head of all the steps it takes, the process, the materials, the colors. I can see all that, but it's really hard for the client to visualize that. So I found it's really helpful to take, and I put everything on a life-size template, and then I actually bring it to the job site and I'll put it on the job site so they got a good idea of what they have in store. And then that allows them to make any design changes last minute before I actually go to the templating phase, and then just to make sure I'm completely on board. And it kind of gives them a peace of mind, and it really helps me too to see that they can see a little clarity, because people just have a tough time with that. Even with normal shower installations and tile installations, people have a hard time seeing it through. So I find it really helps when you can draw it and color it for them, just to give them an idea. So we have any questions? I see everybody's muted. So if somebody has a question, I guess they're going to be typing it in. Is that how that works, Mark?
They can unmute themselves. All of you do have the ability to unmute themselves. So
I'm going to unmute myself for a moment. Hey, Mark, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you, sir. And I don't have as much as a question as much as I do. I just want to say, wow, what an expression of the community that we work in and the industry that we work in. I'm, of course, talking about what happened to Joshua and his van and all of his things, and the way that everyone stepped up on the Facebook pages and through the GoFundMe and everything to help out one of the important people in our community. I was floored. I was amazed. I wasn't surprised. So I just want to say, I'm sorry that stuff happened to you, Josh, but it looks like hopefully we'll be able to help you pick everything back up. And I appreciate you being here today to give us some education.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm super thankful, and I've been really humbled by this whole experience, by the outpour of love from everybody in our industry. I'm planning on getting online and doing some kind of a live video here in the next day or two. I just need to get my head clear, so I can do it without crying in front of everybody. So I'm very thankful, and it is what it is. We'll move on, and yeah, but thank you, Nicholas. I appreciate that.
Thanks for bringing that up, Nicholas. We appreciate you, and Joshua, we love you, and you have all of our support. We love all of you, and thank you.
So let's roll with video number 2. I have my whole template made for the size of the fireplace that it's going to go on. and I only drew the actual mountains. I didn't draw the reflection. The reflection is a tracing of the mountains on tracing paper. And then you flip that tracing paper over and you can trace over. Hear the sound. You guys hear this?
No.
I don't hear it.
It's out.
Okay, well, I guess I can narrate. So, what I'm explaining here is here again. I don't have my notes, so I'm out of order. But so I jumped the gun with the transferring thing. So what I'm explaining here is the tracing paper for the original image up above. You can see I have the tracing paper already on there.
Can I interrupt you for just a second? Did you hear it and then did the sound go away?
Yes.
I heard it at first and then the sound disappeared. Yeah.
I'm going to restart the video. I think I know the problem.
It'll mark.
Here we go.
Okay, when I started to draw this,
Do you hear it now?
I have my whole template
Okay,
made for the size, the
Yes.
that's going to go on. And I only drew the actual mountains. I didn't draw the reflection. The reflection is a tracing of the mountains on tracing paper. And then you flip that tracing paper over and you can trace over the tracing paper and transfer a line to the template. I've gone ahead and already labeled these. So in this piece, I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 colors of tile in the mosaic, plus the slate. So here I've labeled them. I've got A, B, C, D for the mountains to keep that simple, and then I for the ice, and S for the sky. And then I didn't bother labeling the water because the sky will just be reverse negative, and we will use that and just trace it upside down on a different colored tile for the water. So there was no need to label that. When you're designing and this templating process is when you can control your grout lines. This is when you choose how big your grout lines are. I think everybody nowadays wants to keep their grout lines as small as possible. The days of half-inch grout lines are long gone. But with mosaics, you have a little bit of artistic freedom, and the grout lines definitely give you a little bit of a cushion. So I'm going to explain the grout lines a little bit here. I'm not exactly sure which video it is. It's one of the next ones, but I'll be explaining that and how I like to control my grout lines and how I draw my templates or trace my templates so I can see my grout line. And then when I'm cutting my templates is when you can really make any last minute decisions with your grout lines if you want to change them. But so when you're designing it, you have to take into consideration, number one, what materials you're going to be using. And you need to make sure that your tiles, that your templates are going to fit on the tiles that you choose. And if that's not the case, then you're going to have to compensate and add an extra grout line or two if your tile is not big enough for the shape that you're trying to achieve. So yeah, you want to know what tiles you're going to be using and you know, the color scheme, obviously, and then you can pick your grout lines. You know, sometimes you want a thicker grout line in some spots, and sometimes you want almost no grout line in some spots. It just all depends on what you're trying to achieve and the look you're going for on the project.
Joshua, did I get you out of sequence there? Did I skip a video?
No, I think it's good, Mark. Like I said, I don't have my notes in front of me. So, you know, I've got the order of the videos, but my notes aren't in front of me to tell me exactly what's on them. So as I see them, then I can definitely explain what they are. And I'm explaining in my videos what they are. But so I believe the next one is actually I'm gonna be flipping down the tracing paper and tracing the original template for the mountains, the above water mountains. And I'm going to be explaining that process.
Okay, here we go.
Roll it.
Do you recommend a specific size grout line? You don't want to go over a specific size?
Well, I don't think there's any recommendation for grout lines. I mean, they could be whatever you want, but I try to keep everything around an 1/8 inch, 16th of an inch to an 1/8 inch. Try not to go over an 1/8. You know, and when you cut everything doesn't always fit together exactly perfect. So sometimes that grout line will vary a little bit. But if you shoot for an 1/8 inch grout line, you know, you're usually right in there within a 16th, 32nd. So, you know, people just don't like a lot of grout anymore, you know, just because it's traditionally it stains and people have a hard time cleaning it. And it's that, you know, that look of the 6 by 6 inch floor tile with 1/2 inch grout lines is way 1985. So, you know, I think people nowadays, they want large format tile and they want 0 grout lines if you can get them. But we all know in the industry that the grout lines are there for a reason, because the tile all varies, and then, you know, you've got to have that expansion too. So it's all a matter of preference. You know, anything you design, you can design it with however big of a grout line you want. Now that I've got my template made, and I like to put color on it, because then when I make these, I'll bring them over to the client's house and I'll actually put it on the fireplace so they can actually get a visual of what it's going to look like. You know, these aren't the exact colors, but, you know, I've got the color scheme. So I show them the color scheme, I bring sample tiles, and then I put this up on the wall. It gives them a good idea what it looks like. So now that we've got this made, now it's time for the templating. And we'll start with the tracing paper. We've got it pre-done here and folded up. So what I do is I'll start with one piece of tracing paper. And I mentioned that you like to use the fine tip Sharpie. So there's 2 ways to go about this. You could take your fat Sharpie and just go over your line that you're seeing through the tracing paper, and then ultimately cut both sides of that line out when you're cutting out your template. Or the way I like to do it is I like to use a fine tip Sharpie, and then I'll trace out both sides of my line and then I can control my grout line everywhere. And then the reason why I do that is because when you come over here and you get to the end of your paper and it doesn't cover your whole pattern, see, C4 isn't covered, what I do is I'll dot that line. So then I know that all of these are labeled now, because I can see through and label them with what's underneath. So then that line's dotted. So now when I put my next piece of tracing paper over it, I can trace over that dotted line and know that I've got those tiles, and I'm not retracing over something I've already done and cut that out and then go to the trouble of cutting 2 of the same tile. So that allows you the dotted line allows you to see through, because once you start putting multiple sheets of this over itself, all of a sudden you can't see your Sharpie line behind it. So this allows you to see what you still need to do, and you can work your way down. Here again is the same story. I just started on the left and worked my way over and ran short, dotted the lines. And then I started on the end and worked my way over, dotted lines. So now I've got this area in between. So then there's another layer of tracing paper that comes down. I can go over my dotted lines, know that I've got those cut, and then these ones are still dotted because I transferred those through to the next one. And I'll drop that down, wham, and I know I've got those 4 tiles. So with all these layers of tracing paper, now I've got all my templates drawn out. Exactly. When I'm labeling everything, and I make sure, like when I write, like say the tile is S38, the number S, you know, the letter S, number 38. If I wrote S38 on there and just wrote that on there, when I pick that up out of my pile of patterns and I'm looking at it, I could read that because they're all going to start to look the same. And when I look at S38, I'm going to look at that and I might read that 8E5, right? Because if I'm reading it upside down. So what I like to do is I'll put a dot or a line or something underneath my lettering so I know what side's up. So when I read it, it's just instantaneous. So I don't have to like think, oh, well, what is this? Which way does this go? So I'm going to, I think I touch on that. So with what I did on this one, is the original mountains. I put a dot under my labeling, and then with the reflection, when we made the reflection templates, well, we used the same template, but when we did the reflection, we put a line under it versus a dot. So then I know, like, when I finally done and my tiles are cut and I look at it, and it's, if I'm looking at two S38s and one's got a dot and one's got a line, I know the dot goes on the top and the line goes on the bottom. It's just, I mean, it's just a way that I'd like to keep everything kind of organized. And that way I'm not scratching my head and trying to think, well, where does this S38 go? Okay, it goes up here. Oh, no, it doesn't. That's the upside down one. That one goes down here. So with a line or a dot, that just makes it really easy. It just deciphers both. When I put my tracing paper on there, we're going to get to the shot here of the tracing paper I like to use. I use big sheets of tracing paper, and I used full sheets on that, and I actually cut them down because the center of that piece is a reflection, right? And we ended up putting a piece of jolly in there, a little metal, if people don't know what jolly is. So we put a little piece of metal in there as a transition. It was a really nice touch because it gives it just a little bit of it was a copper jolly, so it gives it a little bit of a reflection with the light, and it kind of makes it look like the reflection on a water line. So when I made my patterns, I just had the nice straight edge of the tracing paper I used on the straight edge of my patterns, and I worked off of that, and then I was able to trace all the shapes around that. And then I cut the top of it off and used that for the bottom. So I was able, my tracing paper is 18 inches by 24 inches, I think. So this particular piece was actually an 18-inch wide piece. So I was able to just cut my tracing paper in half and use the top and the bottom and have zero waste on my tracing paper. So just try to keep minimum waste with everything, you know, with cutting tiles, with cutting tracing paper, with everything.
I think Nadine has a question.
Nadine does. You got to unmute yourself, Nadine. There you
okay. So just in terms of your tracing paper, I understand why you're saying why you did it that way, but would it ever help you to just have roll trace so that you don't have to have your overlapping sections, or does the overlapping section help you?
Well, I guess it's what I have here in town. We've got an art supply store in town that carries these big sheets, and that's just always what I've had. I bought a roll similar to that in the past, and I found the paper was a different material, and it actually ripped and tore really easy. So I've used that stuff in the past, and you know, whatever you can find at your local store. I mean, you can get anything online and have anything shipped to you. Yeah. But you know, I found that paper years ago, and I've just been using it, and I'm just, you know, I mean, you kind of get stuck in your ways. But yeah, that would certainly be a lot easier if you just had a big roll, for sure.
Well, I just didn't know if it helped you to have sections of it, just in terms of keeping the mapping a little more segmented as well.
Yeah, that would work great if if you could find a big roll of tracing paper. That works great. I think it was, if I remember right, it's like vellum paper or something. Is
vellum.
That what stuff's called? Vellum paper. Yeah, and it's a different. The tracing paper is a lot thinner. That vellum paper is a little thicker. So you've got that on your side with the thicker. So when you're tracing your templates, it's a little more rigid, and it doesn't want to tend to wrinkle and crinkle on you like the tracing paper does. Yeah. But you know, I've just been using the tracing paper forever, and it you know, I've got my system, and it works. And I've done the vellum, and Lee uses this, I call it magic paper, but he's got another tracing. It's not even really a paper. It's like a plasticky paper that he likes to use, and he found these huge rolls, and he turned me on to that when I was down there last year working on the 2020 coverings thing. So you know, there's definitely different products that you can use, but I just, you know, I use what I have readily available, and I'm just kind of stuck in my ways because I'm a stubborn human.
Hey, Joshua, we have a question from Seth Reddy. Yep. Do you find this part of the process easier to do on the wall?
Yeah, well, you notice that I have a wall that I use for all of my templating, and the reason why, because I mentioned that I normally do everything with an overhead projector, so then I can blow it up right on my wall and trace it right on my wall, and then I'm not on my hands and knees, and it's just easier for me. It all depends on the size of the piece. Sometimes they got to go on the ground, you know, like that whale that I did here, the whale pool. I had to go over to my friend's shop and borrow his shop, so I had a big enough space to blow that up with the projector. And I blew that up, and then when I got back to my shop, the template went on the ground because I didn't have a big enough space to put 2 life-size whales on my wall. So it all depends on, you know, the piece. I know, Seth, you're working on those big dragons right now, and it's probably easier for you to work right off the ground with those because you run into the same issues. You know, there's not enough wall space for something like that. But yeah, I like it on the wall. It's a little easier.
Cutting templates. I like to use a little X-Acto knife with a brand new blade on it. The blade will actually dull pretty quick, so I probably cut, I don't know, 15 to 20 of these out before I switch the blade. And you'll know that you need a new blade because the paper will start ripping. But here, this is pretty simple. It's just a matter of cutting these out, tracing your line, and this is actually dictating what your grout line is going to be on your finished piece. So you want to make sure to stay true to the lines that you've got going on your tracing paper. And if there's a little spot on your tracing paper where you need to adjust a grout line, this would be the time to do it. So these will all get cut out. And then when you're done, you have a lace work of grout lines. It actually looks pretty cool. So it's kind of like a negative of your project. And I've taken those before and like spray paint them over something just to kind of get a relief. But so now I've got B1. I always put a dot or a line or something under my labeling so I know what it is. Because if that was just that and you pull it out, you're like, oh my gosh, what is it? But that gives you a reference of that's the bottom. So I know it's B1. And then I like to save my old grout containers. These make perfect storage. So this is B. That's the B box. We've got Sky, A, B, C, D, A, B, D, C for our mountains, and then we got I for the ice. And our sky is also going to be our water. So that's how you do it. It's just a matter of tracing these and being very precise with your grout lines early on, because like I said, that's going to dictate exactly the size and shape of your tile. And if your grout lines don't jive here, then they're not going to jive when you go put your mosaic together. So there's another B.
So I haven't mentioned it here, and maybe I mentioned it in the next one, but another reason why the labeling is important and putting the line under the label or a dot or whatever you choose is it's important, because if that template's upside down, I mean, when you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of templates and you're just sitting there tracing tile for hours on end, you just keep grabbing them out of the box. And if you grab it and you trace it upside down and you go to all the trouble of cutting it out, and then you go to put it in your jigsaw puzzle, you know, you're putting your puzzle together, and then you find out you cut it upside down, then that's a huge waste of time. So that just allows you to see which side of the tile is right side up when you are tracing it out. So, you know, that's just another reason for it. But in this case, I wanted one upside down and I want one right side up. And I explained a little bit about that in one of the next videos of tracing and, you know, being selective about your tile. You can be selective, you know, if your tile's got a grain to it or a texture, you definitely want to read that when you're tracing, because like in this particular piece, my mountains, you know, when you look at mountains, they have striations to them. And I used some wood grain porcelain, and I used the grain on the porcelain to kind of help pull off, the striations. So, you know, with the reflection, you've got them going one way, and then, or, you know, on the mountains, you got to go one way, and on the reflection, they go the opposite way. So it's just a mirrored image, but you just got to take that into consideration when you're actually tracing them out. You know, you trace out a lot of slate and travertine and stuff, has some really cool texture to it. So, you know, you can use that to your advantage. Even a lot of these porcelains and stuff now, you know, that mimics stone. There's a lot of great texture on them. And, you know, you could have a 12 by 24 inch piece of tile and want to just cut one little chunk out of it because it's got the perfect blemish in it that might work perfect on, you know, on a mountaintop or whatever. So you just got to really read that, you know. The mountains here, I originally wanted to use a marble, but the marble I had was, it just crumbled when it got down to those long little skinny pieces there. And it was a Calcutta marble. So I was really wanting to use the veining of the Calcutta marble in the glaciers and the mountains, because it really just mimics what you look across the bay and see, you know, because when you look at a glacier, it's not just white. There's the moraines and stuff that run down the glacier, and that Calcutta would have mimicked it perfectly. But I had a piece of a 12 by 24 inch tile that's a porcelain tile that was a faux Calcutta. And there you can see a little bit of the gray in it. Didn't quite have as much veining in it to work with because I only had one piece to work with. But you definitely want to read your tile when you're tracing them, because it just adds to the whole overall effect of your mosaic.
So I just wanted to find out, when you're making all these cuts, do you have a harder time doing it on the wet saw and a grinder, or do you have like a ring saw that you use to do all these? It makes it easier.
You know, I am a big fan of my wet saw. Traditionally, before I met Lee, I didn't know a ring saw existed. And I've cut everything I'd say about 95, 98% of what I've cut has all been on my wet saw. The grinder comes out only when I get into a spot where I can't get with my wet saw. So that does come in handy. I find that, you know, the grinder has a tendency to chip the tile a little bit, and that's just a little bit more that you've got to go back in and clean your edges on. The ring saw is great. It's a great tool. I find it's a little more finicky. You know, it's a little ring versus a solid blade. So, you know, you got to be a little bit more gentle with it. But the ring saw does great too. I've got a ring saw. I don't use it a whole lot. But there again, you know, I pull it out when I need the right tool for the right cut. I'll use my ring saw. But I'm so used to my wet saw. I don't know how many miles of tile I pushed through my wet saw over the years. You know, I just find it a lot easier. You know, it's all about the blade manipulation. We talked about that on our tooling issue, and you know, we'll go over that again here. You know, and it's all about how you manipulate the blade. You can use the side of your blade for leverage when you're cutting like an inside arch or something. You know, you want to get as much out of there as you can with a straight cut, and then you can just kind of shape it with your blade.
What were you cutting? What was underneath the paper? What kind of?
Just scraps of sheetrock, drywall. Drywall works great as a cutting board, and you can cut it and cut it and cut it until you cut it so much that when you pick it up, it just falls apart. You know, I'll buy a 8-foot piece of drywall and cut it up into 2-foot squares, and then I use that to cut on. And then, you know, I've got a table in my shop. I can share some pictures with you guys later that I custom built, and it's got like 4-foot by 4-foot plywood shelves that you can slide out of it, so I can work on, there's 4, so there's 8. I think there's 8 shelves in it, so I can work on 8 different things at once if I wanted to, you know. So I've got a 4 by 4 foot removable table that just slides into its own space, and then over that piece of plywood I've got a 1/2-inch sheetrock screwed to it. So it's 1/2-inch plywood with 1/2-inch sheetrock. They're kind of heavy, but it gives it a little more support when they're screwed together. And then the drywall is just a great surface to cut on and draw on and do whatever you want. And then you can just unscrew it when it's toast. You can flip it over. You got the other side to work with, and you got the brown side. And then once you ruin that side, then you can just throw it away and put a new piece on.
Okay, next video.
This is the color we chose for B, our B box here. Now, this is your template for B. We want to make sure that we trace this right side up once, because the right side up is going to be for the mountains above water. And then we're going to trace it out once upside down, because that's going to be the mountains in the reflection. And we want to make sure when we trace these that we're going to trace it, and then we're going to flip this tile, and we're going to write B2 on the back of it with a dot. And then when we have our upside down one, we're going to want to make sure that when it's flipped over, we write B2 and either you don't put a dot because we've got a dot up top. We can put a line under them so we know that the line is all the reflection, or you could put an R for reflection, just so it's labeled so you know what's what, because one will be a positive and one will be a negative. So when I do this, I like to read the grain of the tile. This tile here actually has a wood grain. So we could play with this. We can make the wood grain go on an angle on our template, or we can go with the wood grain. You know, these are islands. They're kind of in the foreground of our piece, and they're real rocky. And the cliffs, you know, they kind of have lines in them like this. So I'm just going to go ahead and play with the lines and keep them horizontal with my piece. And then it's a matter of where you want to put it. Do I want the lights in it? Do I want more darks? You know, you could be really particular about how you want to go about doing that. I'm going to go ahead. This is a straight bottom because it's on the reflection. I am going to actually take advantage of that straight line and use the factory line and go with it right here. I've got these little pieces of tape that I keep on my sleeve, and I'll put a little piece of tape here, and I'll put a little piece of tape over here just to stop it from moving while I trace it. Now when I trace this, it's just a matter of sticking right to your template and trace it out. And then when I cut this, I know I'm going to want to just make this line disappear. When you cut this and you make the line just disappear and you don't take out any more, then you've got the exact size tile that your template was. So now I'm going to pull this off and I can just connect the dots here. So I use little thin pieces of tape. Okay, so now this is B2. So this is easy enough to do on a big piece, but flip it over and I'm just going to write B2 on it. With a dot. 2 is a little hard to read, but I can always just put another 2 on it if that's hard to read. So that's B2. One more tip is when you're cutting these out and you're standing in front of your saw for a long period of time and you've got a bunch of designs on here, you want to make sure that if I'm going to say this is a different tile and I'm going to put this on, you want to obviously use as much of the tile as you can and not have so much scrap, but you want to make sure that you're going to be able to cut that piece out. You know, you don't want to trace 2 pieces together like this and you try to utilize as much of the tile because you can't cut that out because you can only make straight lines. And so you gotta keep that in mind when you're tracing out your templates, that you want to make sure that you can make a straight cut into it with your saw to get the piece, so then you can actually start to shape it. And one more thing I like to do is I'll put an X on the side of the tile. It's waste, because when you get a stack of these, sometimes you don't know which side of the line you're supposed to cut on. So I know that my blade's going to stay on this side of the line, and I'm going to make that line disappear because I've put X's on there.
Notice that was a black tile with black Sharpie. That particular tile, when the water hits it from the saw, the line disappeared, and we all know that. Sometimes that happens. So one good thing to do, and what we ended up having to do with this particular tile, is I went over it with 2-inch blue tape, and then we traced the templates onto the blue tape. And then I went over the blue tape with my mosaic tape. I've got a 12-inch roll of mosaic tape. And you could, I mean, if it's not a really elaborate tile that's not going to be under the, getting blasted with the water for a long time, you can get away with just the blue tape. But sometimes that blue tape just starts to blast off too. It'll peel off once the water gets under it. So I find in order to, like on a dark tile, and you're going to put a dark line on it, you can use different color Sharpies too. I've tried the metallic Sharpies, but those just don't show up. So the black Sharpie over blue tape with the clear tape over it protects your line, and it allows you to cut it out. And that works well with granites and anything polished, like a shiny ceramic tile or something. You know, you don't have to put the blue tape on, but you can put the mosaic tape over it and it protects your line. And then you're not going to lose your line by your water or your fingers rubbing it off, right? When you're cutting it. So that's something that you need to be aware of when you're cutting too, is, you know, even if you don't have it protected and you're cutting, you got to make sure that your thumbs aren't erasing your line on the part of the tile that you haven't got to yet. What else was I going to say there on that? You know, actually, Mark, there's one of these videos, the one that ends in 055. It's 2 minutes, 5 seconds long. That was the one that that had that I was speaking of, the tracing paper, and then the going over it with the pastels. And I don't think that we saw that one.
Yeah,
So,
I think, Joshua, I accidentally skipped that.
Okay.
They reshuffled on my end and I didn't realize it. So let me find that one for you.
Well, you know, just because I spoke of it and people are probably wondering, well, you know, I want to know what he's talking about with those pastels and whatnot. So this will just kind of explain the process a little bit.
Mhm.
And hopefully it explains it. In my mind, it makes sense.
Yeah.
So this is the tracing paper that I like to use, the big sheets, the 18 by 24 inch. You know, it's just really thin tracing paper. I think you get 50 sheets here. So I use that. Just a regular Sharpie for drawing out the pattern, and then I like to use a fine tip Sharpie when I trace my pattern out on the tracing paper, and we'll get to that here in the next video. The artist soft pastels are what I use. I'll just pull one out here as an example with the tracing paper. So I trace over, this is this side. I place the put the tracing paper the right way over the over my pattern, and I traced it out with my pastel. So I put a pastel line on my tracing paper, and that allows me to, once it's traced out, then I can take this and flip it over and line it up down below. And then once I taped it back up on the wall, I'm able to go over it with a pencil over the pastel and trace it down the line. And then when I pull this off, it leaves the pastel lines on my template. And then I can go back over that pastel with my Sharpie. And then I got my mirrored reflection. So that's one way to go about doing a mirrored reflection, or like a corner treatment or something. We'll talk about that later. Which is a corner treatment would be 1/4 of a medallion. So you make a 1/4 of a medallion, and then you can trace it out kind of doing the same way, and you can mirror it, and then now you have a half a medallion, and then you can do the same thing and work your way around to a full medallion. So this is one way to go about doing that.
Hopefully that, you know, that makes sense. And that, you know, that tracing and getting the negative like that's only going to work if you're doing a mirror image of something. And you know, not every project's going to be like that. A lot of my projects don't have mirror images. So, you know, every template has to be made individually. And I think that that's going to be talked about in one of the next sessions with one of the other artists. Is they're going to talk about the overhead projector and how they use that, and getting all their separate templates for that. So I think we had one more video left, Mark, and I think that was, is that the longest one? Is that the 419, the longest one? I know.
I think so. Here we are with video number 7.
There was 2 of them. They kind of both start off the same.
Let's see if this is it.
I think I kind of go over the same thing on this a little bit, just with some more clarity.
So now I'm going to do my reflection. I picked a lighter side of the tile here for the right side up for my mountain. And then in the reflection, I'm going to go with a little bit of the darker side. So the lighter side's above the water and the darker side's below the water. So I'm going to flip this over, because I just traced this right side up. I'm going to flip this over. This is going to be my negative for the water. I'm going to keep my grain going the same direction. And I'm just going to place this over a darker spot on the stone. because I have that to work with. This is a straight line. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a line here and a line down here. And then I'm going to get a straight edge after I get my curves traced out and hit it with a straight edge, so I know that that line's perfectly straight. Because sometimes you can't trace a straight line, and then you're going to end up ultimately cut what you have. So if your line's not straight, then you're going to cut a line that's not straight. So here again, we're going to connect the dots, connect those together, and then get a straight edge. And then I'll put a straight edge down, make a nice straight line. Now I know when I go to cut this on my saw, I'll be able to just run a line straight through there and I won't jeopardize either of the tiles. So I'll cut this line first because this is just a nice straight line. I'll cut that, then that'll separate my tiles. And then here again, I'm going to put X's on the side that is waste, so I know which side of the line to cut. One more thing you can do is you get things traced out, you can dot lines coming into it, so you know that you can make a straight cut with your saw. You know, that's another something you can do. Just so when you're laying it all out, like I said, you don't want to like put something that's C-shaped around this and trace it just to utilize your space, and that's a cool spot with the color. You don't want to do that because you're not going to be able to get your saw in there unless you're able to cut these apart first and then get your saw in there. So you got to think about the way you lay it out. Otherwise, when it goes time to cut it out, it might be near impossible to separate them.
Okay. You know, I mentioned that I had a hard time with the marble cutting my glaciers earlier in this. That's something that you really got to take into consideration too, is like if you're cutting these templates and you got these little skinny templates, you need to make darn sure that whatever you're working with is going to allow you to cut it. That's very important. You know, it sucks to go to all the trouble, and I've done it before, is trace everything out on marble or something really soft, some onyx, and then really, you know, hoping to get all these little fine pieces, and then you go cut them out and you get 5 pieces in and everything's breaking and you get frustrated. And then you not only have to go back and retrace everything out, but now you've wasted a whole tile because you can't get that Sharpie off the tile. So you just, you know, you really got to take into consideration like the limitations of the stone or the tile that you're using and what it's going to allow you to do. You know, I mentioned the veining. You really want to take into consideration like the veining too, because we all know sometimes when you cut and you get done cutting something, sometimes it'll just break in half where that vein is. So that's something else to think about, you know, is look at the backside of the tile, and, you know, if that vein goes through the tile and you can see that it's clearly jeopardized, it's weakened, then you know when you cut that out, it's probably going to fall apart. And then you can just save yourself all that time and trouble by either working your way around that with a different tile or just using a different part of the stone. So, you know, when you're designing and you're templating, you just got to keep in mind what surface you're going to be tracing that out on, because you got to remember, you know, cutting it doesn't always go as planned. And sometimes your saw grabs the piece and you know, it'll break it or it'll pull it out from your hands. And it's just like, I can't stress enough that you gotta really read your material and design according to your material. Because my apprentice right now, she's working on her first mosaic and she's doing a really great job, and I'm really proud of her. But she made the mistake of making these huge patterns, and then she went to hold them over her tile and they hung over her tile like 3 inches. And then she's like, well, now what do I do? And I said, well, you got 2 choices. You can put an extra grout line in that tile and stretch it, and then you can trace that and make it work, or you can find a new tile to trace it on and find something different. So she had to add some extra grout lines, and that's not the end of the world, because when you add extra grout lines, sometimes it actually can enhance the piece. But, you know, I just can't stress enough. You got to know your materials that you have in mind when you're templating, because you can go to all this time and trouble to make all these templates. And if you make a huge template and you're trying to put it on a 4x4 inch tile, it ain't going to work. So you just need to really know what you got, what you're working with when you're designing.
How do you create a market and sell these tremendous works of art that you're making?
Lots of time. I mentioned this in the past, and I have a lot of people that agree and disagree with me on this, but I gave away a lot of pieces in the very beginning. You know, you got to build a portfolio somehow. So, you know, if your friends are willing to let you work on their house and do something cool in their house, or your family, you know, that's one good way to go about it. It's a lot of my really early pieces were for dear friends and family. And, you know, that's when I was teaching myself how to tile. So I was, not only was I learning how to do the mosaics, I was learning how to install. So, you know, they were the guinea pigs. But so I've done that. You know, you give a lot away to friends and family, and I went through a phase where I made a lot of tile mirrors. So, you know, something that you can make to hang on a wall, you know, that's a whole different market than you know, trying to sell somebody on an installation piece of art. I came up a few years ago with what I call tile rugs, and I'm sure a lot of people make tile rugs, but you know, and those when I started out with stained glass patterns and stained glass books, because they're already patterned for you. And I would just kind of mix and match different patterns from different books and come up with my own individual patterns. And I would pre-cut, and that's when I was only cutting travertine, because I thought that was the only thing you can cut and shape because it was so soft, before I stumbled on, you know, cutting porcelain and granites and stuff. But you know, I worked my way into it that way too. And that gave me a lot of practice, is just making rugs and stuff but, you know, I mean, the artist thing doesn't happen overnight, you know, just like building a tile business doesn't happen overnight. You have to really put your heart and soul into it, and just be kind of willing to lose your pants on a few jobs, just to kind of give you the picture, the portfolio, the experience, the knowledge, because you learn from every job. I still learn from every job I do. It doesn't matter how professional you think you are. You always come across something new, and you're always scratching your head trying to find a way through it. So yeah, I just recommend doing, you know, you don't necessarily have to give yourself away, but, you know, do it for half the cost that you think that you would want to charge for it. And make sure to snap pictures of everything. Because, you know, in every job I would go to, this was before the smartphones where I can just pull out my phone. I would pull out my picture book and show it to everybody. And you can tell when people are interested and when they're not. And if they're not, then I just kind of pull it away from them. But make it a point to show people your work, because they're not going to buy anything if they don't know it exists and they don't know it's possible.
Terrific advice. And we have Chris Pearson coining phrases in the chat room, and he said, thank you for sharing. So Chris Pearson, I guess, gets credit for coining that phrase. Thanks, Chris. Does anybody else have any questions for Joshua?
What do you do if you're using, you know, significantly thicker pieces in the pattern? You know, if it's 3/8 versus 7/16 or 5/16, something that's close, okay, that's one thing. But what if you're, you know, 5/8 versus 3/8?
Spot
well, what
I can do it.
Well, there again, that goes to designing and knowing your materials, and that goes to the very start, is when you're designing your piece and picking out your materials and your colors. You want to try to, unless you're going for a relief and you're going for that look, you want to try to get everything as close as you can. I have taken, I've got a mosaic behind me in my floor. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the earth that I did, but all the water in the earth is all ungauged quartzite. So that stuff went from 1/4 inch to 3/4 of an inch thick. That's, you know, it was that was all scrap from a floor I did years ago. And for my house here, I gauged it all to 3/8, so it all matched up and flushed out with the porcelain tile that's set in with it. So what I did is I actually took all the scraps before I mosaiced with it. And that's just the broken tile mosaic with the water with what I did. But I took them and I flipped them all over and I physically ground the back of them down with a diamond wheel. And I ground them down and made them 3/8. So that's one way to go about it. There are, you know, the way that I have traditionally mounted my pieces with mosaic tape and Hydroflex or any kind of a liquid waterproofing, you know, as the glue. So the way that I do my mounting is I'll lay my whole piece out and lay it out over my template, get everything I want. I can adjust every piece and get my grout lines just right. And then I go over it with my mosaic tape. I'll cut it up, and if they vary, which a lot of times they do. This piece that I just did, they varied a little bit. That blue water was it was a thin panel porcelain, so it was thinner than everything else. But once I tape it and I flip that upside down, it's laying perfectly flat on the table. The face side up is now upside down, and that face side is laying perfectly flat on the table. And now you got the difference on the back of the tile. So when you go over that with the mesh and the liquid waterproofing membrane, the mesh is going to lay on your tile the way that it wants to, and then that liquid waterproofing membrane is going to glue it all together. And when it's dry and it sets, you can pick that up, and you'll see here in the very end, I've got a little video of the installation of this piece that I was working on. But once you pick that up and you turn it over, it's flat because it was laying flat when you glued it, and that glue dries, and then the difference is on the back of the tile. So that's one way to go about it. And you know, if your tiles vary a 1/4 inch, then that's not going to work for you, because you're just going to get too much of a gap with the mesh on the back of the tile, and then you're trying to fill in a 1/4 inch of liquid waterproofing membrane, and that doesn't work because we put that stuff on too thick, it cracks, and it just doesn't do what it's supposed to do. But that works really good as long as you keep everything relatively the same thickness. With my methods, which aren't approved yet, but we're working on that. That's the way I do it, and I've been doing that for years, and it's worked well for me, and I've, knock on wood, never had any issue, and I hope that I never do. But and I think that's kind of the same way if you pre-mount with like a fabric, you're going to flip it upside down, and you can put your fabric on there, and it would do the same thing. It would be laying flat. So you just have to experiment a little bit, but just keep in mind, once again, is just make sure that your materials are going to work for your templates, and size wise, not only dimensionally, but the thickness. Sometimes you don't have a choice. For me, what I look at when I'm looking at tile is all I'm looking at is a palette of colors. So if the color works, then that's the very first crucial thing. And then I think about, okay, well, now how am I going to make all these tiles plane out? And if they're not going to plane out and it's not going to work, then I might think of a different tile.
I've got a follow-up question. So you've laid out your pieces, you've got them all laid out before you put the mosaic tape. You lay them all out perfect. Then you mount your mosaic tape to the face, and then you flip it over.
Yeah, well, once it's all taped together, it's one huge monolithic piece, right? So then you can take and you can cut that up into bigger sections. And what I'll do is I'll slide that off my table, and I'll slide it between a couple pieces of like 1/8 inch weddy board or a foam board or something. I'll slide it onto a foam board, so it's on. So I'll put it on my foam board, and I'll put another piece over it, and then I'll flip it like that. I'll take my foam board off, and then now it's upside down, and then I can slide that off onto my table.
Now, so my question would be is if you have different thicknesses as you lay them out dry before you put your mosaic tape, you're going to have some different thicknesses on the top, right? Then your mosaic tape is going to want to kind of tug them and pull them a little bit. If one's lower than the next, when you tape, you're going to ramp down, right, to the low piece, your mosaic tape, or am I overthinking that? No,
I follow you. That does happen. A lot of the thinner pieces, so you put it on, and if you got that drastic of a plane change, then you can take smaller pieces of mosaic tape and put them on there. But a lot of times, that mosaic tape is going to lay flat on the surface of all the top of the tile. And if you got one that's shorter, when you push that mosaic tape down on it, that thing's gonna, it's gonna
Pull
come
it
up.
Okay.
Yeah, it's gonna pull it up unless it's really heavy. If it's a small little piece that's thinner and you stick it with that mosaic tape, it's gonna stick. And then when you flip it, sometimes those pieces like move and whatnot, but when you flip it, then you can take and you can reposition that before you put the mosaic tape on or the mesh on the back of it.
That's what I was wondering, because if you had some differences as you laid your tape on the front, if you flipped it over, if it was a great difference, it would want to push them, you know, one way or the other.
Another issue that you find is if you've got a lot of texture on your tile, if you're taping, if you're putting mosaic tape over slate or something with a lot of texture, sometimes it doesn't want to stick very well. And then when you're flipping that, they move. You're trying to pull it off onto your board, they move. So yeah, there's a little bit of a there's a little bit of a battle with that, but there's ways around it. And you just don't cut your pieces up so big. I mean, if you've got 10 pieces that are all fit together with your mosaic tape on, and you're trying to slide those 10 pieces off your table onto your tray, and those 10 pieces you're having movement, well, then cut that up into into 5 pieces, so it's a smaller section, so you don't have as much movement. And then you want to make sure too, before you do that, when it's all laying face up and you've taped it all and you've cut it up, you want to relabel things. So then when you put it back together, like you can just write a new labeling system. So you've got A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever, however you want to label it. So then when it's all said and done, if you've got a big piece and you just grab, okay, piece B, well, you know where piece B is going to go. So when I pull that off my template, then I'll take like a Sharpie and I'll Sharpie that new line over my template. And so I know that like those 5 pieces that are labeled B will go back into that section that's got the Sharpie line around it. I don't know if anybody followed me on that, but it makes sense here somehow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Terrific. Any other questions for Joshua? Or Joshua, do you want to get to your final video to wrap it?
I don't know does anybody have any questions? I don't see any questions on this page.
Okay.
Or this one. There's a heck of a lot of people in here.
Yeah, thank you for being here. This is
everybody
great.
for being here.
I do want to say there's 7 staff people here, but over 50 attendees, and I want to thank all of you for attending today. This is fantastic, really, really fantastic. Enjoyed it a lot, Josh. Without your notes and everything, you did a fantastic job. Really good.
Yeah, it happened. I'm glad that we can make it happen. Yeah. So yeah, if you want to go ahead and play that, Mark, so this is just a couple minute video. It's just kind of the GoPro put a little video together of the installation. I tried working with it and using some of the videos that we showed you, but when the GoPro does its editing, it was me talking over myself with the music, and it was just too much. So I figured, well, we've already showed you the videos, so I left those out, and then it's just like when we showed up at the job and started this. So I guess roll it.
Absolutely incredible, Joshua. Thank you.
Did you guys notice that the big panels that I was putting up once I glued those together with the mesh tape, like that whole upper row of the right side of the art piece, that was one tile that I installed. It was one big tile. So, you know, that's something to think about, you know, with your pre-mounting is you could take a lot of work out of it. You know, when I first started doing this, I would have sat there and put all those up individually and wedged them all. And it would have taken me all day to put that one piece, that, you know, that one section on. But it was one big tile when it was said and done. It was super rigid. I don't know if you saw me holding it up there, both sides of it. You saw the back side was pink. That was the waterproofing membrane and the mesh. And then you could see the front side was nice and flat. So it really, you know, I think that's something we're talking about in the future is a pre-mounting video. You know, we'll talk about that, and we'll be doing pre-mounting videos down the road here and kind of show you guys our different approaches. There's different methods for that, but it works really well, and it's a huge time saver. And you know, I build it all in my shop, and then we can take it and do the install in just a matter of a couple of hours.
Yes, sir.
One little tip, we do a lot of gypcrete floors up here because everybody runs radiant heat in Alaska. And one trick is if you're not sure, like when the gypcrete was poured, tape down a piece of visqueen, like a 4x4 foot piece of visqueen over the floor. Tape all the edges off really well. And if you come back the next day and there's any moisture on that, then you know it's too soon to tile. Just a quick little tip.
Outstanding tip, Joshua. That is a great tip. Wouldn't you agree, Rob? That's perfect.
Yeah, great information.
Yeah. Okay. Has anybody thought of any more questions for Joshua before we bring Lee in to give you a preview of our next program?
I have a quick question.
Okay. Chad?
When you're getting all those mosaics on the wall, how do you keep them from sagging, from sliding, or anything like that?
Well, since they're all pre-mounted, then you're only having to keep that one sheet from sagging and sliding. And I just use little rubber wedge shims because you can't clip them like I was clipping the rest of the rest of the walls. You know, and if you're setting your mosaics individually, then it's just a matter of you know, mixing your mud to the right consistency, picking the right mud, mixing it to the right consistency, and you just got to shim everything as you go because, you know, gravity's it's not your friend. But if you pre-mount them, then nothing's going to settle except for that whole sheet. And then it's just a matter of just shimming that whole sheet and you're good to go. That's the big advantage of pre-mounting is you don't have any of that issue.
Okay.
Thanks for asking that, Chad. Any other questions for Joshua while we got him? The one and only Joshua Nordstrom?
You know, I want to say one more good thing about pre-mounting too is when you're setting your tile, you don't have as much ooze, thin set ooze coming through. With my method that I like to do, you get a little bit. If you've got a solid back on it, if you're pre-mounting with foam or fabric, then you're going to get zero ooze through. But you know, if you're setting mosaics individually, you're going to have a lot of thin set that you're going to have to go back and clean out of your grout lines. So that's just another advantage of pre-mounting them.
Okay. Joshua?
Well, and I would add the advantage, Joshua, wouldn't you say, is that, you know, leaving your mosaic tape on there, you know, your setting material is going to set slower at a slower rate. So even a day later, that setting material will be soft and you will still be able to clean it out, even if you do.
And it protects it while you're installing, you know, so you're not dropping mud on it. So yeah, if you can keep your tape on while you're installing and peel it off the next day, and then you're ahead because the thin set will be easier to clean up. Even if you're using like platinum or something, you can still get that out the next day if you've got the tape over it because it just doesn't allow it to kick off like it normally would if it could breathe.
So another follow-up question, when you pull your mosaic tape, if it's a really cool house or cold house and it hasn't set enough, do pieces come out sometimes and you have to reattach them?
Well, no, because they, maybe but they're all attached with the
on the back
pre-mounting method. So sometimes that happens, and you don't want to pull your tape straight off the wall. You want to peel it down the wall, and that helps too.
Okay, does that answer your questions?
I got one.
Okay.
Capstone has one.
Yep.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, where do you typically draw your inspiration? I noticed with the mountains and everything that was kind of a cabin house. Do you kind of get around the area that you're gonna be doing the install before you go with that? And then also, do you ever use colored thin set, like put color packs in there?
I've done that in the past. When we did our swimming pool, we dyed all of our mud because I didn't want to go back and clean all of that 5/8, because they were 5/8 inch glass tiles, and that would have been a nightmare. So yes, I have dyed my mud. That's a huge tip. As far as like the design and the inspiration, it all depends. Everybody comes at me with different ideas. This particular project, that's actually my neighbor. They live below me, and they've got an amazing view of Ketchimak Bay. And they wanted to, they saw one of my past projects I did with a mirrored reflection of Ketchimak Bay, and they really love that. So I just sat there, and sometimes I'll take pictures of the mountain scene if that's what they want. So I've got something to draw off of. Not too many people want things exact, right? They want some of that artistic look to it. So, with this one here, it wasn't about making the mountains exact. When you look across the mountains from us, that's, there's some definitive peaks and some definitive islands, and those were kind of in there, exaggerated a little bit so people know what it is. But, every job's different. I'll normally with this job, it was just one drawing. I was just working on a project that kind of fell through the cracks. And, I had 5 different renditions for them drawn up because sometimes people need to see that many ideas before they can really get a vision in their head of what they want. And then I can take remnants or little pieces of this one, little pieces of this one, and this one, and I'll put them together, and just gives them more options. I've done, mountain scenes in the past where I've gone down to the beach and taken pictures and tried to replicate it as best as I could. It just all depends on the project and what the people want. I did a job for a neighbor down the road, and it was the very first thing I did when I moved to town. And he's a big horse guy, and I took pictures of all of his horses and all the neighborhood horses. And this is back when I was making tile from scratch, and I made the horses and I glazed them to look exactly like his horses and the neighbor's horses, and those are permanently on his wall. And a lot of those horses aren't around anymore. So, it's just every job's got a little different research behind it and what you got to do.
Sure. Well, it all looks wonderful. So thank you for your time.
All right. Joshua, great program. Absolutely terrific. Jim Olson has a question for you.
I don't actually have a question. I just want to let everybody know that there were quite a few comments about the text that came to remind people of this event 2 hours before. It's a good reminder. Mark put up a post there that if you want to be included in our text program, and all it is letting you know of what programs we have coming during the month, and then reminders for each of them. Just text NTCA to the phone number 31996, and we'll have you entered on there, and we will send you a text. So I appreciate your comments that was helpful. Thank you. And Joshua, you were fantastic. Fantastic.
I'm writing that down, Mark. I almost missed this, you guys. I thought it was at 4 my time, and it was at 3 my time.
That's all right. I had your phone number.
What was it? NTCA 3196? Is that what you said?
31996.
31996. Okay.
And we promise not to.
You can remember the number if you remember how many spacers were in the bowl, and if you add the A and the B together and then combine the numbers, string them together, then it's a good way to remember.
It worked, Randy.
31996.
Randy, that came out of the mind of Randy Fleming, you know.
Grass doesn't grow on a busy street.
That was awesome, Randy.
Watch for his next video. Lee Callawart, what are we going to do next time?
I don't know. First of all, thanks for the text 2 hours prior, because that's when I registered. But we're going to be touching on some of the older methods and kind of diving into some things we're experimenting with, a couple of different types of templating processes that may save you time. We'll be talking about corner treatments and where you can go from there. I don't know, Mark, if you want to just show that one example just as a teaser of the install, where there was an installation of a 3/4, half, and full medallion, and how that can be applied.
Okay, I'm going for the 3/4 picture.
Okay. So that's just one example of how you can draw a picture, a design of maybe in some cases a 1/4 or radius, in some cases an 1/8, just depending on the intricacy of the design. So we're just going to show you just some different ways to look at doing certain types of artwork, and different methods, different techniques of templating. We don't have to show the other things. Really, that's pretty much tells the story. Everybody here understands what a 1/4, an 1/8, right, of a piece of pie looks like, and just expanding upon that and building from that, and the different applications, the different uses of those pieces of the pie, so to speak. So that's one aspect of what we'll be talking about.
So as the teaser here, I have in front of me on my screen, the things that you can't see are amazing. So next time we're going to bring those up, and Lee, you're going to show us how to accomplish that and more.
Yes, I look forward to it. And thank you, Joshua. I really appreciate you coming in today, and with all that's happened, and just show must go on, right, brother?
Sure. Break a leg.
This is world-class information that isn't happening anywhere else in the entire tile industry. I know everybody's tired of the term world-class, but man, to me, that's the right term. So not happening anywhere else. You saw it right here. We're making history. Thank you to Joshua Nordstrom. Thank you to the Artisan team, Lee Callawart, Jane Callawart, Angie Helford Ray. Thank you for our NTCA team, Rob, Randy, and Jim. And we will see you on February 3rd for a roundtable, then again on February 9th. Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, you guys.